Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC television podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Casey. So I hope everyone's been having a good day so far, or if you're just getting started out in the day, I hope your day ends up really well. So today we've got 4 segments lined up as usual. We have the current episode of Manifest, or I guess technically speaking, by the time the podcast airs, it will be 2 Manifest episodes ago. Then we're going to be moving on to the final 2 episodes of The Wild, followed by episodes 3 and 4 of The Circle, and we're going to start doing 2 of those each podcast to get caught up, because I believe, if not the final episodes have dropped, the final episodes are gearing up to drop this upcoming week, and then we'll be looking at episodes 3 and 4 of Your Honor. So, as I did say, we will be starting off with Manifest. This is Season 3, Episode 4, titled Tailspin. So, ever since the ending of Season 2 and these various 4 episodes, we've had a couple different jumps in time. This episode makes it even more clear as to when everything is occurring. So, at the end of Season 2, you know it's sometime in the winter, because obviously there's snow, and at the end, the lake is all frozen over. So, yeah, once again, it's winter. Then we start off in the first episode, where it has been 3 months since the ending of Season 2, and then this episode, right in the beginning, it says that 2 more months has passed. So a total of 5 months has passed between the ending of Season 2 all the way to Episode 4. Now, kind of jumping into the thick of the episode really quick, just because I want to deal with all of the time stuff right now. We get a timestamp about a third of the way into the episode, in which they show the exact date that the Major died, which is also the same time when they all fell into the ice and all that other stuff. So it was, I believe, December 28th. And so we know it's been 5 months and maybe just a handful of days. So we have January, February, March, April, May. And like I said, it's been a handful of days. And then I believe there is a prom ticket on the refrigerator that says, I believe it says June 8th. So, yeah, it's been 5 months and then like a week or 2. So this is where we're at right now, is June 8th, the night or the day of Olive's prom. So that is all out of the way. Now, with that, too, we also have the death dates. We saw that, the meth heads, Jace, Corey, and Pete, they were gone for 3 months, so they only have 3 months. Well, if it's been a little over, or technically they were gone just under 3 months, even though the show says it's 3 months, it was just under 3 months. But when we get to this episode, they say that they have like less than a week to live. And two of them have been on the run for pretty much the whole time, and Pete's been stuck in jail. And he's only, to our knowledge, he's really only had 2 callings, or technically, I guess, 3 if you include the one before he got locked up. So, anyway, that's kind of all the timeline stuff. So, the episode kind of starts out with Ben, Sanvi, and Vance. Sanvi and Ben are headed to an unmarked warehouse, unmarked facility to meet up with Vance to discuss what's been going on, most notably everything that's been going on with Ben's hand ever since he touched the tail fin. And they finally see Vance, and Vance just looks so angry. Even though he's been back in the States for about 2 months, he's still very angry at Ben. There's been no communication, as they say, literally within the first sentence of them seeing each other. Ben makes kind of a joke about it, but as a way of, saying that he's happy that he's ultimately seeing Vance again, because they've been working together for so long at this point. But yeah, Vance is not happy. He told him specifically, do not help, and by trying to help out, he almost caused a huge international incident. Now, Vance does say that he had it covered and he was on the verge of being released anyway, which I'd be very curious, especially if he's marked as dead. I mean, I don't know what kind of identity he was strolling around with, but also he probably doesn't have any true legal documents or any sort of evidence suggesting that he got to Cuba legally. So I'm very curious how that would even worked out. I feel like the Cuban government would have kind of been able to sense that there's something wrong with this guy, as well as could be some sort of international spy. But yeah, that whole thing aside, they finally go into the facility, and as we had last seen in the ending of episode 3, there was some sort of big reveal. Now, you don't really know what it is at the time, obviously, because that was the cliffhanger for the episode. I wasn't really thinking it was going to be anything crazy. And I even said that on the last podcast we talked about Manifest. I just kind of thought it would be there'd be this huge center, but I was wrong. So obviously the big deal is that they were reconstructing the 828 plane that had exploded at the airport. But the crazy thing is that they discuss is the tail fin, which we were kind of under the assumption this whole time that the tail fin that was fished out of Cuba was the real tail fin, and that the plane that blew up probably wasn't the original plane. But we actually learned pretty quickly that somehow the plane probably exploded, somehow got reconstructed. They went back to the airport where they came back, 5.5 years later, and then it exploded again, which also kind of factors into something that we'll be talking about towards the end of this segment. So that was all very interesting. But the crazy thing is that when you see the plane that they're reconstructing, it's, certain parts of it are blown out because of, I guess, where the explosion was centered at. It's all mostly charred and burned. There's nothing really there anymore. I mean, you don't see the seats or anything. It's really just the framing of the plane. So, but the one thing that you do see that looks like it's in not perfect condition, but it's in pretty good condition, is the tail fin. So that's the crazy thing, is that they did fish that out of, the middle of the ocean near Cuba. But that also leads to, once again, something we'll be getting to soon. But they know that it's the real tail fin. And so, by that, they're also starting to really piece together the fact that they probably did really die. But the question is how did they come back? And, their immediate response is divine intervention, aka, God or, some sort of higher power. So, I mean, that's the thing. I feel like with the way that this show is being written and the way that we're being led to believe certain things, the answer to this show is going to have to be some form of divine intervention, or even which I think I literally said this when I was watching, because I originally started watching this show with my mom, but I think I even said with her that it could be aliens. We don't have any evidence of aliens at this point. I mean, I think we more so, I mean, I actually, really thinking about it, I think it realistically is some sort of god or higher power. Because religion is a pretty common theme in this show, and even during season 2, probably middle of season 2, the creator of the show himself had talked about how Christianity is not the religion or not the only religion, and so they dove into the Buddhist side of things. So we've seen at least those two. I feel like we've maybe seen something to do with Islam as well, but I could be wrong. I don't know why I keep thinking that. I could be also thinking about Lost, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, we've also seen, even though it's mythology, it still was a recognized religion back in ancient times, but we've seen a lot, and I mean a lot, of Egyptian religious influences in this show as well. So, and they even talked about one of the goddesses, Ma'at, I believe is the goddess they were talking about in the previous episode, and, which deals with all the phoenix feather, or, peacock feathers that have been shown throughout the entire series at this point. So yeah, I do think religion is more probably going to be the answer to all of this, but even that, I mean, there needs to be a lot more. It can't just be, it was God all along. Like, God has to have some sort of plan. It's got to fit into a bigger picture. Once again, even similar to what Lost did in its final season. There was this sort of higher power, but the higher power was involved as a means of finding someone to also protect the island. So that's at least what it was with Lost. It's interesting, we had Samvi's assistant from last season make a little bit of appearance, where you kind of think that he might have gotten taken out by the Major or something like that, but no, he was actually recruited by that group of people. And, they even talked about Sanvi joining the team, because that way she could at least be in the loop. And in addition to that, she really knows her stuff, and she's done a lot of, one-on-one research. It's the same thing with Ben. Like, they're just one person, because that's like Ben and Sanvi's role. Ben, deals with all of, the mystery stuff, the lore of what is going on with them. Sanvi deals with the medical side, and then you have Mickey on the other hand, who just kind of follows the callings. And that's kind of another thing, is like, I always thought that Mickey was one of the, well, no, she is one of the main characters, but I always saw her as the main character due to how they introduced her character in the beginning of the first season. I mean, even in the very first episode, she is literally narrating the story. It is the only time we've ever gotten narration in this show. But personally, I'm more invested in Ben's story, and I feel like Ben is way more of a central focus. Or maybe not exactly way more, but he does feel a little bit more of a central focus than Mickey or Sanvi do. So, yeah, so there's that. So real quick, I want to just touch on Sanvi a tad bit more. So as I talked about some of the dates earlier, December 28th being one of them, that was the day the tail fin appeared, and Sanvi is pretty certain that it was once the Major had died, then the tail fin disappeared, which is what we do know right now. My guess is that whatever this divine intervention is, that's intervening on their story, they wanted to wait until the Major was taken out to kind of push forward the mystery. And that's why the tail fin disappeared. It's like, okay, this obstacle's taken out. Here's the next piece of the puzzle. You guys are going to have to figure this out yourself. And I mean, they're starting to run low on time. They were gone for 5.5 years, but they've been back for about 2 years at this point. Which which is kind of crazy to think about. And, obviously, like I said, they've been, they did pretty much half a year's worth of time jumps or, passing of time in this season alone. So, very interesting with that, too. Also, going to Michaela, I do often find that Michaela's storylines are somewhat interesting, but also kind of a little bit on the more boring side. Sometimes even, Ben's family, it's the same thing with them as well. Which obviously, yes, Michaela is Ben's family, but I mean his is like nuclear family. But anyway, we got the introduction of Zeke's powers, which was interesting. We got that hint in episode 2, how Samvi was like, how did you, know what I was feeling when no one else did? So I'm sure that's going to play big time, especially given that it seems like Zeke just hangs out at the clinic all the time. So yeah, I mean, we'll have to see where that kind of comes into play. Michaela, Zeke obviously was trying to help with Evie's mom and all of her dementia stuff. So that was fine. Michaela kind of went on her own little mission, with Coach Hannity and the whole Jace, Corey, and Pete storyline. So that was kind of interesting because he was dealing drugs and one of the students died and they got blamed on the kids. Which does feel like something very realistic that could happen, where, you have this man in a position of power and you have, 3 kids who kind of grew up in sketchy areas. It's pretty easy to probably pass the blame off, or at least back then it would have been. In today's day and age, I feel like it would have definitely been looked into a little bit more, or maybe even a lot more. And then we obviously have the coach getting arrested. Pete's already been in jail. Jace shot Corey, so Corey was kind of out for the count, not dead. So Corey's going to be in jail. They only have a week left until their death date, and they haven't really been propelled forward with these callings at all. But this was part of the calling, was, why Mickey got so involved was to help Pete and his, avoiding death dates. Which I feel like they're getting off real easy compared to Zeke and Michaela and the rest of them. Also, on another little storyline, you had, I believe her name is Dre, or Dreya. She and Jarrett were kind of going after the whole, missing major storyline, which feels really weird that he is, going so hard into trying to figure out what's going on with her. I mean, I guess it could be as a means to protect Michaela, but, yeah, I was really hoping that even if he did find the park, there would be no evidence to find, which it doesn't seem like there is. Because, I mean, it's been about half a year. There wouldn't be any evidence left behind. And these guys are professionals. They wouldn't leave evidence behind. But I feel like they're going to hit a dead end. That's all they... Unless there's some, crazy, video surveillance or something they can tap into, there's really nothing else that they can find. And so I think that story, or they feel like they've got to be hitting a dead end. I mean, what happens even if they discover that it was Samvi that killed the Major? What are they really going to do? But anyway, that's just kind of a brief overview of everything and my thoughts, especially dealing with this crazy timeline. But yeah, on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the final 2 episodes of The Wilds.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
All right, and we are back. So, we had started off the podcast talking about Manifest episode 4 of season 3. So now we're going to shift to Amazon Prime's original show, The Wilds. We're going to be talking about the final 2 episodes 9 and 10. So, we'll start off with episode 9. I might kind of just bleed into episode 10, but episode 9, its centric character for this episode was Martha. Now, I did briefly talk about Martha. Most of Martha's storyline at this point has been more or less reduced to what's the word I'm looking for? She was a catalyst, I guess, for Tony and Shelby's relationship, as that's a huge reason why there was a lot of divide between Tony and Shelby, because Martha and Shelby got really close, and then Tony was kind of jealous. She's a very angry person, obviously, as I've said before, very confrontational, and I think Martha's really her only true friend, so to kind of, like, lose that friend makes you kind of jealous. And I mean, this is something you actually really do see oftentimes in real life. So I feel like it's a very realistic aspect of her character. You do have people that are like, this is my best friend, not your best friend, and we're going to have some beef if y'all start hanging out because you're taking my best friend from me. But people can have multiple best friends. So it's just kind of really ridiculous, but it definitely feels like it fits the character, and it definitely feels like it fits the character given the fact that they are supposed to be in high school. So anyway, once again, the episode is centered around Martha. Martha is, overall, she's a pretty positive person, friendly person, and non-confrontational, which is really weird given the fact that Martha and Tony are such good friends, but it could very much be the fact that they are opposites. They kind of fit very well together in that regard. But it's still kind of very interesting to see that. So at this point, we're at day 22 of them being on the island. So it was day 15, which was 2 episodes ago. So episode 7, it was at the end of episode 7 when the plane arrived. And so they pretty much blew through all of their food at the end of that episode, as well as the next episode, so days like 15 and 16. So yeah, once again, it's been a week, and they have been completely out of their food for about 2 days at this point. Which is kind of crazy, that in 2 days' time, they didn't think to, go out and forage for food. I mean, heck, the whole time they were even on the island, they only really found water, and even that was something that no one was really searching for. I mean, it was kind of shown a little bit in the first episode, but it wasn't until Fatten got mad and she kind of ran off that she found water. But it didn't seem like really anyone tried to find food. Now, you would also think on the island, there's got to be some sort of abundance of food, especially somewhere in the South Pacific. You would think the islands would have like coconuts or bananas or papayas, something. But anyway, so ultimately you see Martha, Tony, and Shelby all going out to look for food, which once again, it factors into Tony and Shelby have had a very combative relationship at this point. Martha's kind of in the middle of both of them, although she started to shy away from Shelby just a little bit after the, kind of homophobic comments from a couple episodes ago. But so it was very interesting that those three went out there. It made the most sense, for the plot, because that's where you're going to get the most entertainment out of and the most conflict, or at least seemingly the most conflict you're going to get. They run across a goat, which Martha, I believe part of it comes with her roots of being Native American. She's kind of more caring for animals, and so plus she's also, once again, she's just a very friendly, positive person. She scares the goat away because she does not want them to kill the goat, which kind of factors into a side of her that she's not ready to tap into, the more, the harsher reality of things. which really, like I said, does factor into her character. Tony and Shelby get a little mad, and Martha kind of runs off. So Martha kind of does her own thing, and Tony and Shelby are just looking for food at that point when they come across a, I believe it's pronounced lychee tree. So they find a ton of berries, and then it leads to them hooking up. And so that's kind of the general thing of what you were getting with Tony and Shelby. I mean, you're getting a bigger deep dive into their relationship, and this was a huge step. It wasn't just a kiss, because I think we'd had 2 kisses between them at this point, but them actually hooking up is just a whole other level of their relationship, or their budding relationship at that. So we start to get some backstory with Martha, and Martha had a pretty bad injury as a kid. She was pretty involved in all of her Native American dancing. I don't really know what it's called, and I don't really think they actually talk about what it's even called in the show. But that's a pretty big part of her life. You see some, interesting scenes with her. Well, not super interesting, but you at least see some scenes between her and Tony and their relationship and how they are there for each other. Tony is very much different with Martha than she is with anyone else. She generally does not get upset with her. She does not treat her with the same hostility that she treats many people, even right off the bat of meeting people. So, but anyway, Martha had sustained an injury, and there's just this seemingly sweet old physical therapist who tries to help her out when she was younger. So it comes out that the physical therapist that had been helping her was accused by a number of women of sexual abuse, which I should have, set a trigger warning, so I apologize, and we're going to be talking about this at least for the next, couple minutes. But then there's no relevance to it after this. But anyway, so all these allegations start to come out, and there's a big trial, and they reach out to Martha because they know that she was one of the people, and she denies it. It doesn't really affect her at all. But during one of the sleepovers with Tony and Shelby, or Tony and Martha, you have Martha wet the bed, which is something that she hasn't done since she was in physical therapy, since, she was a little bit younger, kind of like a child. So Tony and Martha's mom kind of put 2 and 2 together that there probably was sexual abuse involved. And Martha denies it and says that the girls are lying and all this other stuff. She's like hardcore denying it, and then they finally convince her to actually take the stand. But when she does take the stand, she ends up lying in front of the grand jury, because at the end of the day, she was sexually abused. And this is something that you do see once again in real life, too. It's all about creating realistic characters, and it's all about creating dynamic characters that people can relate to, they can sympathize for, and even empathize for. It was a turn that I was not expecting, a lot more serious, but yes, interesting nonetheless. But that's the thing, she's never been able to confront this different side of her, and by the end of the episode, thinking about everything that was going on in her life and the relation of the flashbacks, she kind of snaps, in a sense, and takes, dips into that darker side, and she kills the goat. Which they do very much need for survival, although, on the flip side of things, Shelby and Tony did find the lychee berries, or the lychee fruit, whatever it technically is. So, moving on, actually, a huge piece of information, I completely forgot there was another tiny little storyline going on. So, with Nora outing Rachel about everything with her swim stuff, she, has been kind of scared to go into the water for the past week. She wants nothing to do with the water. She wants to put that life behind her. And Leah kind of starts to have a bit of a breakdown, especially as her paranoia and compulsions come to a big head. And she swims out into the sea as if she's going to reach land, convinced that they're like there's something beyond there. Like, she just, once again, she's having a full mental breakdown, which then does prompt Rachel to go out there and kind of confront this side of her that she didn't want to confront, putting it all back. With that, they do end up sedating Leah, which really kind of puts her out for the count. And the episode ends with Nora in the middle of the woods talking to a tree, and Leah just happens to stumble far enough into the woods, exactly where Nora was, to discover that, while yes, Nora was talking to a tree, she was actually talking to the people, and she is the second informant, which was a very interesting little twist. Something also to note is that in this episode, we did not get any, flash forward, I believe, as some people are saying it, or like I said, it's the future, or in the reality of it, it's really the current present. So that was also something really interesting that we did not see, which goes back to something that I had talked about, at least a few podcasts ago, where they almost do make you think, especially in the beginning of the series, that Nora and Martha are probably dead. There's not a whole lot of mention. They almost talk about them very fondly as if they had passed away. In addition to that, I mean, the only other stuff that you really see is Dot and Leah are, like, fine, so to speak. But then you have, once again, Shelby, had a mental breakdown, maybe even another one later, who knows, and that's why she doesn't have any hair. And then you also have everything with Rachel, to the fact that she's missing an arm. Which I don't believe they actually tell you why in the flash forward current present. Yeah, they definitely don't tell you what happened with that. So that was just all really interesting. I really wasn't expecting Nora. I really was thinking that it was going to potentially be Dot. But then at the same time, I thought that with everything you had seen in the previous episodes, it just seemed like a red herring. And even the same thing with Shelby. Shelby just coincidentally happened to be there when she found all the bags and other little tidbits, which once again just feeds into Leah's paranoia about everything. I think that's more or less it for that. Martha, it wouldn't have made sense. Tony, that would have been very uncharacteristic. I mean, that's the thing. If you really actually thought about it, which I didn't exactly think Nora, I can't really remember. I wish I had my original notes, because I use the TV Time app to really track all my movies and shows. And oftentimes when I'm done watching an episode, I'll write up a really, detailed comment. Most of the time. Sometimes I'll just post maybe a quick little paragraph, or maybe even just a sentence or two about what I thought on the episode. But I do remember that my comments, or my notes, so to speak, for the Wilds were pretty detailed. But TV Time does not exactly make it easy to look back at your comments. They do have a comments tab, but also between all of my shows, and I've really only been starting to comment on a lot of stuff in the past year, I have about 1,700 comments, so I'd probably easily have to scroll through maybe a few hundred of them to get back to when I watched The Wilds, which was back in mid-January going into late January. So, actually, as we're kind of winding down here, we're running out of time for this segment. I did not think I was actually going to be talking about episode 9 for that long, but I will definitely talk about episode 10 in the next podcast, as that'll bring the Wilds to an end, and I'm sure there's more than enough to talk about in that finale as well. But yeah, I guess just running through the informants really quick, we know that Leah is paranoid, compulsive, obsessive, and she's the central character. It wouldn't really make sense for her to be the informant. Dot and Shelby were red herrings. Rachel, definitely another person who probably wouldn't be able to keep her mouth shut, especially when it comes... Although you could see the protector side of her coming out for her sister. Martha, way too nice, way too pleasant, way too much, I think, trauma. Although all these girls have some sort of trauma, much more severe than some of the others. So once again, Nora, actually, when you really break it down, she's the only one that makes a lot of sense, but I would say that Dot could also be a potential one as well, but she was, I think, the original red herring of the show. Anyway, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about The Circle, episodes 3 and 4.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, and we are back. So, we have already talked about Season 3, Episode 4 of Manifest. We also talked about The Wilds, Episode 9. We were supposed to talk about both Episode 9 and 10, which was the finale of Season 1, but I ended up really kind of going off on Episode 9, in a good way, too. Not in a bad way. I think that just goes to show how much I actually did really enjoy the show, and it became a lot better as it progressed. And I hope it continues to do that if they end up going through with the season 2, which I'm 99% sure they are. But I think they really should take it in a more mature direction. Anyway, that aside, we're now moving on to The Circle, episodes 3 and 4, and I will definitely hit on both 3 and 4 because I already feel like I'm a little behind with The Circle right now, so I want to kind of speed things along over the next couple podcasts. So anyway, we had a very interesting ending for episode 2, where we saw that boy band pop star singer Lance Bass from NSYNC would be joining The Circle. So the episode starts off with that, and lo and behold, and I'm not even kidding, I swear to you guys that I actually thought right before they revealed it would be crazy if Lance ended up being a catfish. But you'd have to have someone that knows the ins and outs, because who's going to question a celebrity that large? And lo and behold, it was a girl named Lisa. I believe she's in her early 40s, and she has been Lance Bass's personal assistant for the past 14 years. And Lance has been in the industry for roughly 25 to 30 years. So, I mean, she, knowing him for 14 years, she should know him pretty dang well. And I believe she even said beforehand she was a pretty big super fan of NSYNC, and so I think she really knows her stuff on this one. So it'll be very interesting. The show kicks off with Lance's introduction. People kind of freaking out. Some people don't really know who Lance is, which I get. Chloe, I do understand where Chloe's coming from, because aside from the fact that Chloe is only like 21. She also is from the UK, and I have no clue the extent of NSYNC's influence in other parts of the world. And even if they did have pretty big influence in the other parts of the world, their influence would not be as large as it was in the United States. So someone who is 21, who grew up in the UK, really wouldn't know. I think Emily was also one of the other ones who didn't know who Emily, and I'm going to always use people's character names in this show just to kind of avoid any and all confusion, because obviously they go by their character names like 80% of the time. So, even Emily was the same way, didn't really know who Lance was. So they started off with this little breakfast, segment, breakfast with, I forget what their little segment was called, but it was a brunch thing, but yeah, brunch with Bass or something like that. So Courtney, who supposedly was a pretty big NSYNC fan, and also whose favorite NSYNC member was Lance, said, that if Lance happens to be a catfish, Courtney would be able to, suss him out. And, so I think it was Tara Alicia who said it, a little forward, if you ask me, about what Lance would do with the money, if he ends up winning. And Lisa, who plays Lance, was just like, oh, I would do it, I would use the money to kick off an NSYNC tour. And she even says that, she was doing it to be like a little jokey, a little cheeky, but she didn't follow it up with anything. And that was a huge foul. That was a huge mistake for her as a player, and that was like one of her first defining moves. I think the missed opportunity would have been, whether it would have been true or not, it would have been playing to the character, would have been Lance saying, I actually plan on donating the money to LGBT youth. Because Lance is gay, and there's also a number of gay players in the circle, and even those who aren't gay are pretty progressive, or at least very accepting. And so that would have been, no one could have argued. It would have made perfect sense. And so that was a huge fail. We also got the aftermath of the Bryant eviction, or the Bryant blocking, whatever you want to call it. And Tara Alicia sort of aired out Savannah, even though it wasn't actually 100% Savannah. And man, you could sense Savannah was mad, and other people picked up on it, and so it's like a war to come between them. So that was also really interesting, because I actually really liked in the first two episodes Savannah and Tara Alicia. Really, really, really liked Savannah in the beginning. Tara Alicia grew on... I liked Tara Alicia in the beginning, but really grew on me in the second episode, to the point where I was kind of really liking them both. Now, I did think it was a mistake that Savannah really fought hard for Courtney, because most of these episodes in the circle, it's literally like each round is like a day, maybe 2 days at most, some of these rounds. And yeah, I mean, I get it. If you're building a bond with someone, you want to protect it, but the game is so early, you should not be going that hard for people. And so I think that right there was Savannah's really big mistake, because it does start a rift. And Savannah also made a very poor choice in saving Trevor over saving Chloe, because that also not only causes doubt about the girls' alliance, but it also causes Chloe to be upset about it. And Tara Alicia hopped right on that by having the girls chat without Savannah. We also had a couple little smaller notes where Trevor and Emily finally got to talk. They got to share, family values. And while, Emily is being played by a man, and even the same thing with Trevor, or Trevor's being played by a girl, but Jack, who plays Emily, is using his own truth and sprinkling it in. So to an extent, he is being genuine. But man, he won hard on the sports stuff. Now, something that feels like a very big missed opportunity with Emily is Emily should be saying something like, I never really had girlfriends growing up, so all of my friends were guys. So, and my family's a big sports family, so blah, 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 which also would explain a lot of Emily's impartialness or middle grounding to a lot of the drama that's been going on in this show, especially in episodes 3 and 4. Once again, feels like a very big missed opportunity. I think this is the frustrating thing about this show is that, I mean, I don't know how well I would do, but I guarantee I would not be making some of these amateur mistakes. And people also seem to be getting really hung up on the catfishing. The catfishing is seriously irrelevant. It does not matter if you're playing a guy, a girl, a celebrity, a nobody. Like, it really does not matter. What matters is the relationship you're forming with them, and in hopes that you can sift through the bullshit or get someone that is being genuine with you, even if they are being a catfish. The catfish is irrelevant. But anyway, I just want to say, with the whole Trevor and Emily thing, I was crazy surprised to see that, oh goodness, what is her name? Delisa, who plays Trevor, she had a notebook full with a lot of information that Trevor, her husband, would actually know. And so that's how she was able to actually figure out the sports references, which was really cool to see that. So the episode kind of comes to a close with the Truth or Dare segment, in which most people picked Truth, and it was pretty harmless. Courtney chose Dare, and I mean, it was really stupid, like, especially given that you can't really see anyone. I mean, I'm sure it's fun for the people because they are probably bored out of their minds in the circle. But yeah, so the first real hitter is to Teralicia, to Teralicia about who she believes to be the biggest player. And so she says Savannah. And I mean, that's true. Who else is really coming off as a big player? It's definitely Savannah, and Teralicia kind of knows a little bit more about her game more intimately, which then does not sit well with Savannah, especially after the whole call out. And then so she also chooses Truth, and it says, who do you trust the least? And that's where the cliffhanger ends. Now, we already know, it's not much of a cliffhanger because we already know what the answer is going to be. So that's how the next episode picks up, and Savannah says Teralicia. But instead of just saying Teralicia, and I think Teralicia elaborated a little bit too, but Savannah really went in on Teralicia, and once again, it caused a war. And, goodness. But Teralicia actually said a quote which I thought was kind of interesting. She was just like, she trusts me the least because she fears me the most. I actually really like that quote, and I do think that is, to an extent, true, but I think also people are letting their emotions and bitterness get in the way a little bit. Because sometimes with these games, because most of these games, most reality competitions, unless it's something like Fear Factor or Wipeout, it's all based around, social interactions. It's a social game, social politics. Sometimes you just gotta shut your mouth, no matter how upset you are. Because at the end of the day, it is you really making a dumb comment, a petty comment, a bitter comment, a comment to fight back, worth $100,000 or worth $500,000, like Big Brother, or $1 million, like Survivor. It's ridiculous. So, Savannah had her little blow up, and then you can kind of see division in the house. Some people are on one person's side or another. So at this point in time, there are 8 people in the house again. So the Teralicia side of things, she has River and she has Chloe. Chloe because of all the initial stuff that Savannah screwed over, and River because of a very good conversation of like a little bro, big sis kind of thing. And so that's Teralicia's team. Then you have Savannah, who has Courtney, who she fought hard for, and then she also had that, like, flirting relationship, but then it also gets rebranded as, like, a little sis, big bro sort of thing, similar to Tara Alicia and River, although River is gay. Savannah and Trevor, you had that relationship with. So it's Savannah, Courtney, and Trevor, and on the other side, it's Tara Alicia, River, and Chloe. Then you have Emily in the middle of things. Now, ultimately, Emily's been trying hard to play both sides and be impartial, which is frustrating Chloe, but she also has a close relationship with Chloe. So ultimately, it makes sense for Emily to stick with Chloe and River and Tara Alicia, mainly because she's got a threesome with Tara Alicia and Chloe, but also because she's got a close relationship with Chloe. And at the end of the day, Tara Alicia ends up being a bigger target and thus a bigger shield for players like Emily. Lance is still new, still trying to understand the social dynamics, so you can't really include Lance in that. So they do their rankings, and I'm very happy to say I actually got, and I did this for season 1 too, I got almost all the predictions right for the rankings, because they're pretty, if you really just think about things for a second, they're actually pretty easy to figure out, especially in this situation where there is a clear divide. I will say though, I wasn't 100% sure about where Tara Alicia or Savannah would fall, who would be last versus who would be second to last. So it ended up being Tara Alicia at the bottom, then Savannah, then Courtney, River, Trevor, with Emily being second and Chloe being first, both of them as influencers. I figured that was going to happen. I was really hoping Tara Alicia wouldn't be at the bottom, because I actually really like Tara Alicia, and it's crazy. Savannah has left a bad taste in my mouth. I thought Savannah had probably one of the strongest games in the very beginning. Granted, it was just the first day in the game, and I thought there was a huge chance that she could go very far, if not win the game. But she fought too hard for Courtney. She did not save Chloe when she should have. She's made the most amount of mistakes in the game that don't exactly seem like they are mistakes. So they both try and do a little damage control. Tara Alicia tries to connect with Courtney. Courtney's not exactly buying it, but does realize there are probably bits of truth in the statement. And Savannah tries to reach out with Chloe and Emily to keep that side of the girls' alliance strong. But it's now day 4, and this is the only time she's hit back up on that girls' alliance. They had the conversation the first day, and Tara Alicia followed it up on the like second day. And they've had one-on-one conversations. She's too little too late. I could just feel it. The only way that I would see something is if Emily, really convinced Chloe to kind of stick, there. So you then have the episode ending with the block, and the final statement that's made before they get the other players' thoughts on things in the influencer circle is that they end on a pretty sour note with Tara Alicia, which I was like, oh, please let it not be Tara Alicia, but also this feels very much like a red herring. They're trying to mislead us, and it's kind of like the second time that Tara Alicia got hit with a negative comment. So it could have been something else, but I felt like they were just trying really hard to mislead the average viewer. Because I do oftentimes think that television treats viewers dumber than what they really are. But also, if you're not thinking too hard about the game and you're just kind of enjoying it and just, mindlessly, getting into it, you might actually be fooled by that. I get fooled by stuff too when I don't start thinking critically, but I love thinking critically about stuff like this. So, the final block was Savannah. Savannah had made way too many mistakes in the game, and I think I was ultimately happy because I really want to see Tara Alicia make it far. Then, through a little twist of events, they told Savannah to visit the person she thought deserves to win the game, which ended up being Courtney. I thought maybe it could be Trevor, but I was fairly certain it was going to be Courtney, and I was right. And then as a result of that, because Savannah chose Courtney got to visit the Inner Circle, which was this really weird room, very futuristic. So that was very interesting. My guess is that Courtney will be able to view actual surveillance, or possibly even just who the person really is. Which reminds me of a couple games, especially if you ever played the Alien game on Jackbox. She'll be able to see if someone's a catfish or not. And in addition to that, I kind of hope she's able to see the surveillance, because people are being watched anyway. So it's not really an invasion of privacy. But so I think that's what it's going to come down to. And that's how the fourth episode ended. So you had a very interesting little Savannah Terralisha war arc. And I think they actually did a really good job of telling that narrative in this season. I already see an elevation of the way that they are editing and directing this piece. But what I would like to see is, and it kills me, is that with the Circle, these people are... Sorry for the silence. It's just a little frustrating. These people aren't really thinking strategically, which I think does come down to their casting. They cast people that seem generally vapid and don't really think too critically about things. Now, Terralisha and Savannah did, especially with Terralisha. It's one of the reasons I actually really like Terralisha. People need to start looking at this game differently, and this game also needs to be balanced differently, because it still is very, very ill-balanced. The game is almost broken. I wouldn't quite say it's broken yet, but it is almost broken. Which I'm sure I will probably talk in depth about that later. But on that note, we're going to take another quick break before we come back for our final segment of Your Honor.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back for our fourth and final segment of this podcast. So we have already previously talked about Manifest, Season 3, Episode 4. We've talked about The Wilds, Episode 9, which once again, we were supposed to talk about 9 and 10, but I went a little crazy with episode 9 in the best way possible. So we will be talking about 10 at a later date. I also talked about the very interesting end to the story arc of The Circle, episodes 3 and 4 of so far season 2. So now we will be shifting our gears to Your Honor, episodes 3 and 4. So, we did talk about Your Honor on the last podcast, so we are kind of seeing a lot of the repercussions of everything that has happened with Adam and Michael Desiato, most notably where we're at with Kofi Jones. Kofi did plead guilty and is currently in jail. So we see him in jail as he's kind of trying to get adjusted and tuned into what his life is going to be for the foreseeable future. I can't remember if he got a life sentence or if he was going to just be in there for like a couple decades, but either way, he's seemingly in it for the long haul. So after Kofi kind of gets settled in for like a day or so, we have Lee, who is the lawyer that Michael had contacted in the previous episode. Now, as we do see, Lee and Michael have had a very interesting work relationship. They go out for drinks, they discuss each other's cases, and they try and find out the truth. It's a very interesting relationship, and they definitely seem, despite especially what Lee's occupation is in the company she works for, they do have their own sense of morals that they really try and uphold. Now, for Michael, we'd hope that would be a given, giving that he is a judge. But as we see, everything he is, all of his principles are coming crashing down on him because of his son, which even before, he was ready to help his son, turn himself in up until the point where they saw who the family was. Which who knows how that would have turned out. I think they're being extra vicious because they think it is gang-related activity. Anyway, so Lee's very interesting. She's willing to do this all pro bono, and she, tells Kofi that, she knows he's been gassed and all this other stuff. So she's got a plan, even though Kofi's not really willing to work with her for fear that something might happen to his family. So then we get introduced to another character, Carlo Baxter. Now, we don't really know much about Carlo. Obviously, we know that he's the oldest kid of the Baxter family. And clearly, he's the one that's closest in his, filling in behind his father. Whereas Rocco seemed to be very much a normal teenage kid, and also the daughter, Fia, I believe is her name, we saw that she is kind of very much a normal kid as well. But Carlo, on the other hand, like I said, we don't know much about him, but we do know that he had killed a 15-year-old black guy, who we're 99.9% sure from everything we're given in the show, he did that because Carlo's a racist. And I believe the kid that he also had killed was associated with Desire, which was not a detail that I actually originally picked up on my first time watching that episode, because they do talk about it in episode 2, where the head of the Baxter crime family, he thinks, along with his right-hand man, that it's retaliation for what happened. So at least I believe that's exactly what they were saying, that the kid that he killed was associated with Desire. Now, it's a very interesting thing that, he killed this man. Everyone kind of knows that it was, a hate crime, although we know from the show as well, he's on the verge of being released from prison. I mean, he killed someone. He's not going to be in jail for just a couple years unless, once again, they don't really tell us how long he's actually been in prison for. But if this kid was 15, maybe Carlo also did that when he was 15, or maybe he was 18, and I think now he's somewhere in his early to mid 20s. So who knows? Maybe he's been in jail for 5 to 10 years, and we know that he's days away from being released, which leads to everything that's going on with Rocco's funeral. They try and get him released early, or at least released to go to the funeral. Now, this is the point where the mom really starts to step out as a character. You almost kind of think that she's just this grief-stricken wife, but no, she's got an agenda, and she is willing to do anything and everything she can to make sure she gets what she wants. And so even when Carlo attends Rocco's funeral, the security guards are like, yo, you cannot come close to him. You've got to keep your distance. But she does not stop. She's actually a very frustrating character I do not like. I almost kind of like the dad a little bit more. But it's also crazy the amount of stuff that she ends up getting away with in episodes 3 and 4, which this is the first notable instance of something she gets away with. He's a prisoner, and these security guards are doing their job. She really can't have contact with him, although she does not stop. So anyway, they managed to get Carlo transferred to Kofi's prison, which we do see throughout the episodes that Kofi is in some sort of danger, as he's almost been beaten up at one point or another. Question is was he going to be beat up or killed because of everything that happened with Rocco, or just because he is from a gang, and the fact that he's also black too, that these people might want to kill him or beat him up in prison to kind of keep their numbers and their power. So on the other side of things, we go back to Lee. Now, Lee she reminds me of the female version of Michael, and I think that's part of the reason they've gotten along so well. And you can see this romantic relationship happening too between them, which is kind of in its early stages at this point. But she's really good at trying to come up with creative solutions. And in this point, she doesn't exactly blackmail the DA, but she does, or not blackmail. Yeah, blackmail, she definitely wasn't doing that, but she comes up with a creative solution in which she knows there's a scandal going on. She can kind of prove it, so their best chance of avoiding a local, county or even state scandal is to just drop the charges against Kofi, and by dropping the charges, he gets released from prison early. And she makes it freaking happen. But the unfortunate part is, despite all of Michael's best attempts to keep Carla away from Kofi, even getting potentially Kofi put into protective custody, Carlo goes to the prison. And unfortunately, that is where the episode ends, with Carlo and Kofi face-to-face in the middle of the night. Another little storyline that we got to see in episode 3 was Adam. Adam's guilt really starts to manifest in this episode. And I know a lot of people online, including, in the TV Time comments and on Reddit, people were getting really frustrated with Adam. But the thing that people have to realize is that Adam is a kid. He is 16, 17, 18, I mean, even the kid part aside, he's a human being. And he, unfortunately, did kill someone in a very crazy way while he was having an asthma attack, while he was being chased from a gang, while trying to visit, the site of his mom's death and, pay his respects to her. There's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, people need to cut him a little slack. So going into episode 4, kicks in right after the fact, where despite Lee's attempts to get Kofi out, which she was going to get him out, Kofi's dead. Carlo killed Kofi. Now, the security and warden and the people in the prison very unfairly do not contact Kofi's mother, who is Famale, and gets Lee, and in turn Lee gets Michael to go visit Famale to deliver the news and, deliver his personal items, which is absolute bullcrap. Now, when they're there, you get to see that they actually have a really large family. There's a lot of kids. There's no father. Kofi was a huge part of, despite him being in a gang, which he probably had to do to help his family, they're struggling financially, and it's really sad, and it is a reality of the world, and it's why a lot of people, regardless of race, do end up, going into the streets to deal drugs or to do what they got to do, because at the end of the day, people need money, and people need quick money, and that lifestyle can be dangerous, but it could also be easy. It's what's enticing. I mean, even on the flip side of things, you see plenty of instances where people gamble away, like gambling, for instance. People gamble away their whole lives, their savings, their family's possessions, their homes, their retirement, whatever, because they're looking for quick cash despite it being very risky. I mean, granted, like I said, they're a little bit different, but I think there is a bit of similarities in that instance, where people do stuff like that. And I think this show does a really good job of shedding light on the reality of the world and the reality of the situation. And I hope that, even if there's, one person, but hopefully a lot more, that watches this show and gets an alternative perspective on things, to help them grow as people and to realize that things are not as black and white as people would like them to think they are. Anyway, that sort of tangent aside, although it wasn't exactly a tangent, it really did relate to the show, we have the Baxter family, the father, go to the prison and get really upset with his son for killing Kofi, but the warden kind of covers things up, and, by having a death in the prison, it warrants a federal investigation, and he's not having that. So they cover up Kofi's death, they get a coroner to cover up the evidence, and rule his death as some sort of ridiculous, I don't know, it's just insane. But once again, even this stuff really does happen. So you see, Adam, like I said, his guilt is manifesting in a number of ways, and we find out that the girl that he has been with and has been sleeping with is actually his teacher. And his teacher, she gets a little nervous, when they talk in school, and he's dealing with a lot of stuff, and despite him admitting his guilt to her, which she says don't do, because he's just dying inside, he needed to tell it to someone, it does cause a little bit of friction. But what really kills everything is when Adam's friend starts to make sexual comments about the teacher. And so Adam punches him and he starts to fight him, which then causes him to almost get expelled. But then we have the introduction of the grandmother, who they call instead of Michael, and she manages to get him suspended for 3 days, over expulsion, and we find out that his grandmother is a U.S. senator. Now, I don't know what is going on with her character, but her character is very interesting because she's very quick to see through people's bullshit. She has her own charm. She has her own way of dealing with people. And I think she is either going to be extremely detrimental to them upholding the lie as well as keeping Adam out of harm's way, or she will end up getting sucked into the whole thing. So it's very interesting to see where her character's going to go. But she ends up inviting some people over for dinner. She fixes a big dinner up for Adam. She can see Adam is really dealing with a lot of, trauma and grief, although she, I think, is attributing it to everything with Adam's mom. And she blames Michael. Michael and her have a pretty big conversation about everything. So, so she invites Nancy over, who is one of the detectives that's been looking into everything. Michael already was going to have Charlie over, and then also Lee kind of makes a stop by, because like I said, you can see there is this relationship more than what we had known about their relationship in the past developing, so, i.e. romantic. So, it leads for some pretty tense conversations at the dinner table that ultimately lead to the dog, the family dog, uncovering the bloody rag from episode 2. And Nancy even says, "Is that blood on the rag?" Which at the end of the day, I mean, you're not really, I don't think anyone's really going to put 2 and 2 together that easily until more evidence is there. And you do kind of see that Nancy just kind of says her thing, and Michael does his best to charm and to push aside everything to get everyone not thinking about the rag. But it ultimately upsets Adam, and Adam wants to know, what really happened to Kofi. And Michael just kind of sticks to the fictionalized version of what they have been saying this entire time, which I think irritates him even more, to the point where he decides that he's going to go to Rocco's memorial service, which is where he runs into Fia, Rocco's older sister. And you can already tell, despite them having a very short exchange, it is going to be an exchange that will probably carry into the rest of the series, probably another romantic relationship. But we're not 100% sure. So the episode actually ends with the now oldest son of Famale returning home with groceries because he'd been given money from Desire, also as a means to recruit him into Desire. And as he's on his way home, through some pressure from the mom, the Baxter mom, Gina, they decide that they're going to blow up Famale's home as retaliation for everything, because Kofi's death is not good enough, which is absolutely ridiculous, because there were a number of children which we all got introduced to at the beginning of this episode. I mean, there are kids that were probably 6 years old. It's ridiculous. And it was taking things way too far, which is just another reason why I really dislike Gina. Now, granted, you can also blame the father, because he's the one that probably organized the whole thing, but it was because of the pressure with Gina. Gina is not afraid to call him out in front of people, which in their line of work, luckily, the Baxter dad is not an abusive guy. He kind of actually rolls with Gina's punches, but Gina is definitely abusive, very much emotionally abusive. So anyway, the episode ends with the whole Jones family now dead, except for the now oldest son, who's probably 14 years old, maybe at the most. So he's got nowhere to turn to, and so he'll probably have to turn to the streets. So that's kind of the end of that segment, and that is now the end of the podcast. So thank you for listening to the GSMC Television Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice little review because it really helps us out. And if you could also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much, and have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.